January 30th, 1944. Anzio beachhead, Italy. The pencil trembled in Headman Vera Hoffman's hand as he pressed himself against the concrete wall of his command bunker, recording what he had just witnessed through the observation periscope. The Americans possess artillery of unimaginable power. Bunker Louisa no longer exists. 120 centimeters of reinforced concrete disappeared in an instant. Through the smoke and dust, he could see the crater where the fortified point had stood for 8 months. A Turter bunker, rated to withstand direct hits from 210 mm shells, according to Wehrmacht engineering standards, had been erased from existence by a single shot from an American super-heavy gun firing from beyond visual range. 32 men of the 3rd Panzer Grenadier Division had vanished along with tons of concrete and steel. The weapon responsible was the M1 240mm howitzer, making its combat debut with the 697th Field Artillery Battalion. What Hoffman and thousands of German defenders would discover in the Abbé Paupieu following months was that every assumption about fortification warfare had become obsolete overnight. The U.S. Army had deployed a weapon that could transform the strongest fortress into a tomb with mathematical precision. The M1 240mm howitzer emerged from a 1940 U.S. Army ordnance study that reached a blunt conclusion. Existing American artillery could not defeat modern European fortifications. The largest gun then available, the 155 mm Long Tom, could damage but not reliably destroy the Wehrmacht reinforced concrete bunkers that were becoming standard in German defensive doctrine. The required specifications seemed impossible. A mobile weapon firing a 163-kilod projectile, more than 22.5 kV, with enough precision to hit individual bunkers capable of penetrating 180 centimeters of reinforced concrete. The entire system had to be transportable by standard military vehicles. Unlike the massive railway guns of World War I, what emerged from the Watervliet Arsenal in New York was a masterpiece of engineering. Weighing 29,347 kilos in firing position, the M1 required a crew of 14 men and could fire one shot every 3 minutes when operating at maximum efficiency. The barrel alone weighed 10,430 kilos and measured 10.6 meters in length, requiring specialized transport on a 6-wheel wagon. The assembly time averaged 8 hours, including the excavation of a recoil pit and assembly using the specialized M2 crane that accompanied each gun. Production began in November 1942 with 6 pilot models. By 1944, the Watervliet Arsenal had reached a production rate of 13 guns per month, ultimately manufacturing exactly 315 units before production ceased in August 1945. Each gun cost $380,000, the equivalent of 12 Sherman tanks, but its strategic value would prove to be incalculable. The 687th and 698th Field Artillery Battalions arrived at the Anzio beachhead in January 1944, bringing the first M1 240mm howitzers into combat. The German 14th Panzer Corps had transformed the surrounding hills into a fortress system with interconnected bunkers commanding every approach to Allied positions. On January 30, 1944, at 14:30 hours, the 697th fired the first 240mm shot in combat, targeting a German observation post in the Alban Hills. The shell traveled 21,000 meters over 13 miles and scored a direct hit. The bunker, along with its observation equipment and crew, ceased to exist. Major Herman E. Smith, commanding the 697th, documented the psychological impact of the weapon in his unit's history. After our first day of firing, German prisoners reported complete demoralization in their units. They spoke of earthquake shells that made the ground shake for hundreds of meters around the impact. Many refused to occupy bunkers after witnessing our attacks. The mathematics of destruction at Anzio was precisely recorded. Rounds fired, 2,847. Bunkers engaged, 67. Bunkers destroyed, 61. Average rounds per bunker, 4.8. Maximum range achieved, 22,951 meters. The War Diary of the German 715th Infantry Division, captured after the liberation of Rome, observed, "American super-heavy artillery makes our fortified positions untenable. Losses caused by individual shells exceed those of an entire day's conventional bombardment." The breakthrough at Monte Cassino in May 1944 demonstrated the 240mm howitzers' ability to rupture the toughest defensive positions. The Gustav Line had held for months against repeated Allied attacks, anchored in the ancient monastery that German paratroopers had transformed into a fortress. The 240th Field Artillery Battalion, equipped with 8 M1 howitzers, joined Operation Diadem on May 11, 1944. Positioned near Mignano, they could reach every German position along the Gustav Line. Their primary targets were the reinforced bunkers built into the mountainside below the monastery. British Major General Francis Tucker, whose 4th Indian Division had suffered terribly in previous attacks, witnessed the 240mm bombardment and reported that American super-heavy guns achieved what months of bombing and conventional artillery had failed to accomplish. Each shell that hit the target completely eliminated a German strongpoint. The psychological effect on the defenders was decisive. They understood that nowhere was safe. The 240mm howitzers fired continuously for 72 hours during the breakthrough battle, expending 1,847 shells. Post-battle analysis showed that of the 43 main German bunkers targeted, 39 were completely destroyed. The 4 surviving positions had been abandoned by their crews after near misses. The effectiveness of the 240mm howitzer derived not only from its massive shell, but from the entire American fire control system. The Fire Direction Center, FDC concept, refined through 3 years of combat, allowed for unprecedented precision and coordination. Forward observers equipped with SCR-610 radios could request fire from positions miles away from the guns. Their target locations were transmitted to the FDC, where trained personnel used graphical firing tables, slide rules, and meteorological data to compute firing solutions. Within 4 minutes of a fire request, shells could be impacting targets over 22.5 kilometers away. The time-on-target technique multiplied the psychological impact. Multiple batteries firing from different positions at staggered times could place all their shells on the target simultaneously. A German bunker could receive 6 240mm rounds within a 2-second window, more than a ton of high explosive arriving without warning. Lieutenant Colonel Thomas B. Hedkin, commander of the 245th Field Artillery Battalion, explained in a 1944 report, "We do not fire barrages. We conduct surgical strikes. A forward observer identifies a specific bunker. We compute the solution and launch 1 or 2 rounds directly onto it. The precision terrifies the Germans more than the volume of fire." 4 M1 240mm and howitzers attached to the 19th Corps participated in Operation Cobra, the July 1944 breakthrough from the Normandy beachhead. The German 352nd Infantry Division had fortified every hedgerow and intersection around St. Lo, creating a defensive labyrinth that paralyzed the Allied advance for weeks. The 272nd Field Artillery Battalion brought its 240mm howitzers into action on July 24th, systematically destroying German strongpoints that had survived massive carpet bombing. Hill 122, the key terrain feature dominating St. Lo, was fortified with concrete bunkers built into the reverse slopes, immune to aerial bombardment. Technical Sergeant Raymond Jones, Section Chief of Battery A of the 272nd Field Artillery, later testified, We could see that the Germans thought they were safe in those reverse slope positions. Our observer passed the coordinates. We fired 3 rounds for effect. When the smoke cleared, there was only a hole in the hillside where the bunker had been. The psychological impact was immediate. The German 3rd Parachute Division, elite troops who had fought at Cassino, began to abandon prepared positions rather than face 240mm bombardment. Their commander, General Richard Schimpf, was captured on July 31st and told interrogators, "Your super-heavy artillery made static defense impossible." My men, veterans who had never retreated, fled from their bunkers. The assault on the Gothic Line in northern Italy during the fall of 1944 proved the value of the 240mm howitzer in mountain warfare. German engineers had spent a year building fortifications along the Apennine, ridges using the mountainous terrain to create positions considered impenetrable to artillery. The 697th Field Artillery Battalion, veterans of Anzio and the advance to Rome, positioned its howitzers in the valleys below the Gothic Line in September 1944. Using high-angle fire, they could launch shells almost vertically over German positions carved into the reverse slopes of the mountains. The destruction of the Futa Pass fortifications demonstrated the weapon's capabilities. The pass that controlled the main route to Bologna was defended by elaborate bunker complexes built by the Todt organization. On September 16, 1944, the 697th began the systematic bombardment of these positions. Private First Class Donald Matthews, a loader for the 697th, wrote home, "The shells go so high, they disappear into the clouds, then come straight down on the German bunkers. The explosion shakes the whole mountain. After we hit a bunker, there is nothing left but a crater." The Futa Pass fell in 5 days. German casualties from bunker collapses exceeded those from direct combat. The war diary of the 4th Parachute Division recorded, "American super-heavy shells penetrate overhead cover previously considered adequate. Morale is collapsing as troops refuse to occupy fortifications." The systematic destruction of the Siegfried Line, starting in September 1944, represented the 240mm howitzer's greatest contribution to Allied victory. The West Wall stretched for 627 kilometers from the Netherlands to Switzerland, comprising more than 18,000 bunkers, pillboxes, and fortified positions built between 1936 and 1940. The 265th Field Artillery Battalion brought its M1 howitzers to the Siegfried Line near Aachen in September 1944. The fortifications they faced were formidable. Type 10 bunkers with walls 0.9 to 1.2 meters thick, command bunkers with walls 2.4 meters thick, and infantry positions with interconnected fields of fire. The first major test came on the Scharnhorst Line, an extension of the Siegfried Line defending Aachen. On October 8, 1944, the 265th began preparatory fires for the assault by the 1st Infantry Division. In 6 hours, they fired 238 shells, destroying 19 of 22 targeted bunkers. Corporal Robert Williams, a forward observer for the 16th Infantry Regiment, witnessed the bombardment. Every 240mm impact was like a small earthquake. Concrete bunkers that we were told would take days to reduce were gone in minutes. The Germans inside never had a chance. The pattern repeated across the front. The 278th Field Artillery Battalion supporting the V Corps destroyed 73 bunkers in the Schnee-Eifel region during December 1944. The 698th Field Artillery Battalion operating near Metz eliminated the fortress ring around the city in November 1944, firing more than 3,000 shells in 2 weeks. The Vosges Mountains campaign from October to November 1944 presented unique challenges. German forces had fortified the densely forested ridges with bunkers camouflaged by thick tree cover. Invisible to aerial reconnaissance and protected from conventional artillery by the terrain, the 265th Field Artillery Battalion developed new techniques for forest warfare. Using proximity-fused shells when available, they could achieve airbursts above the tree canopy, with blast effects penetrating downward onto the bunkers. When using conventional shells, they employed 4-and-1 tactics. 4 shots at the corners of a suspected position, then 1 directly in the center. First, Sergeant Harold Anderson, Section Chief of the 265th, described the technique. The forest made observation difficult, but the 240 mm didn't need precision. Even a near miss would collapse bunkers through ground shock. We would fire, wait for the dust to settle, and the infantry found nothing but craters and bodies. The liberation of Strasbourg on November 23, 1944, was preceded by the 240 mm bombardment of the outer fortifications. The German 503rd Infantry Division abandoned its positions after losing 12 bunkers in 90 minutes of directed fire. Post-war analysis by U.S. Army engineers revealed why the 240 mm howitzer proved so effective against fortifications. The M17 concrete-piercing shell used a hardened steel cap backed by a 163 kN mass traveling at 701 ms. This delivered approximately 3.8 million joules of kinetic energy to an impact area of less than 50 centimeters. The resulting pressure, exceeding 200,000 psi, overcame the compressive strength of any concrete. More critically, the delayed Satudi fuse allowed penetration of 0.9 to 1.8 meters before detonation. The explosion within the concrete mass created what engineers called sympathetic fracturing. Shock waves reflecting off the steel reinforcement created complex stress patterns that shattered entire structures from the inside. The M114 high-explosive shell contained 22 kilos of TNT with aluminum powder additives, increasing the blast effect by 40% over pure TNT. When fused for surface burst, it created craters 15 meters wide and 6 meters deep in average soil and 9 meters wide and 3.6 meters deep in rocky soil. The employment of 240 mm howitzers required extraordinary logistical support that demonstrated American organizational capabilities. Each battalion daily needed 50 to 100 shells, 18 to 36 tons, 2,000 gallons of fuel for prime movers and generators, specialized maintenance equipment, dedicated ammunition trucks with reinforced suspensions. The ammunition supply chain stretched from the Watervliet Arsenal to the front lines, sometimes covering 4,800 kilometers. Each shell required precision forging of the shell body, machining to tolerances of 0.025 millimeters, careful filling with explosive compounds, installation of precision fuses, individual inspection, and proof testing. By March 1945, the U.S. Army had stockpiled more than 500,240 mm rounds in European depots. Monthly consumption peaked at 35,000 rounds during the Rhine crossings. This represented an industrial capacity that Germany, Japan, or even the Soviet Union could not match. The Rhine crossing operations in March 1945 demonstrated the 240 mm howitzer at the peak of effectiveness. Operation Plunder, Montgomery's planned crossing on March 23 to 24, was preceded by the largest artillery preparation of the Western War. The American 12th Corps contributed 12,240 mm howitzers to the bombardment. The target was the Wesel fortified zone, where the German 84th Infantry Division had built elaborate bunker systems along the east bank. Starting at 17 hours, on March 23rd, the 240 mm howitzers began the systematic destruction of identified positions. Captain William Morrison, commanding Battery B of the 278th Field Artillery Battalion, recorded, "We had aerial photographs showing every bunker. Starting from the north, we worked south, engaging each position with 4 to 6 rounds. By midnight, we had destroyed 31 bunkers and damaged 12 more. The crossing encountered little resistance. German survivors reported complete demoralization after watching their fortifications disintegrate. The 84th Division's strength records showed 2,400 casualties from artillery alone, mostly from bunker collapses. The encirclement of Army Group B in the Ruhr Pocket from April 1 to 18, 1945, saw 240 mm howitzers reducing industrial facilities converted into fortresses. German forces had fortified factories using reinforced concrete industrial structures as defensive positions. The 698th Field Artillery Battalion supported the reduction of the northern sector of the pocket. The Krupp Steelworks in Essen, fortified with additional concrete reinforcement, was targeted on April 9th. 240 mm shots transformed the main factory buildings into twisted rubble. Sergeant James Peterson, a forward observer for the 313th Infantry Regiment, witnessed the destruction. These were not normal buildings. They were industrial fortresses, with walls 3 feet thick. The 240 mm shells went through them like tissue paper. The psychological effect on the defenders was absolute. They surrendered in masses after seeing what happened to the Krupp facilities. Army Group B, initially with 430,000 men, surrendered after only 18 days. Intelligence reports credited the rapid collapse partially to the systematic destruction of fortified positions by super-heavy artillery, which convinced the defenders that resistance was futile. The production of 240 mm howitzers by the Watervliet Arsenal represented American industrial mobilization at its best. The facility, established in 1813, had become America's main large-caliber gun factory in World War II. Production statistics tell the story. November 1942, 6 pilot models. 1943, 72 units, monthly average of 6. 1944, 158 units, monthly average of 13. January to August 1945, 79 units, monthly average 10. Total production, 315 units. The workforce peaked at 9,100 employees working in 3 shifts, 7 days a week. Women comprised 35% of the workforce, performing precision machining operations previously considered impossible for female workers. The Arsenal's monthly payroll exceeded $3 million, making it the largest employer in the Capital District. Each gun barrel required 65 tons of special steel, 847 individual machining operations, 72 hours of precision drilling, heat treatment in furnaces reaching 1,500 degrees, and individual proof firings with overpressure loads. Quality control was exceptional. Of the 315 guns produced, only 2 failed acceptance tests, both due to minor issues in the recoil mechanism, which were quickly corrected. No M1 240 mm howitzer ever failed catastrophically in combat. American production of 240 mm ammunition defied German comprehension. The Watervliet Arsenal alone produced 2,000 shells monthly in 1944. Additional production at the Picatinny Arsenal and civilian contractors raised total monthly production to 10,000 shells in early 1945. Each shell represented a masterpiece of mass production. The shell body was forged from 4140 chrome molybdenum steel, machined to tolerances of plus or minus 0.001 inch, filled with 48.55 relibs of grade A TNT, equipped with precision-machined rotating bands, calibrated and individually inspected. The logistics chain delivered this ammunition with remarkable efficiency. Liberty ships transported 240 mm shells as deck cargo, with each ship carrying up to 500 units. Red Ball Express truck convoys included specialized ammunition sections with reinforced vehicles designed for the 360 LLB shells. By April 1945, U.S. forces in Europe had expended 118,429 rounds of 240mm ammunition, maintaining theater reserves exceeding 100,000 shells. This lavish expenditure, impossible for any other belligerent, multiplied the weapon's psychological impact. Operating the M1 240mm howitzer required exceptional teamwork and physical endurance. Each 14-man crew functioned as a precisely coordinated team, with each member being essential to the weapon's operation. Crew positions included the section chief, a sergeant commanding the piece. The gunner, responsible for aiming the weapon. The assistant gunner, who operated the breech. Numbers 3 to 8, loaders. Numbers 9 and 10, who operated the M2 crane. Numbers 11 and 12, powder handlers. And numbers 13 and 14, drivers and vehicle security. Loading the weapon required extraordinary coordination. The 360 lb shell was lifted by the crane, guided by 4 men into the breech, and then hydraulically rammed. The powder charge, with up to 8 separate bags, was loaded behind the shell. The complete process took 90 seconds for a well-trained crew. Private First Class Michael Sullivan, a loader for the 697th Field Artillery Battalion, described the physical demands. After 10 shots, everyone was exhausted. The concussion from the firing was like being punched in the chest. We rotated positions every hour to maintain efficiency, but knowing what our shells did to German bunkers kept us motivated. The forward observers who directed the 240mm fire held one of the most dangerous jobs in the war. Positioned with the frontline infantry, often beyond friendly lines, they identified targets and adjusted fire with lethal precision. Lieutenant Robert Anderson, a forward observer for the 265th Field Artillery Battalion, survived 187 days in combat. His personal record included directing the destruction of 47 German bunkers. In a 1985 interview, he reflected, "Calling for the 240mm unit was like summoning Thor's hammer. I would identify a bunker, radio in the coordinates, and minutes later, it ceased to exist. The power was intoxicating, but it made us reflect. Each shell could kill dozens of enemy soldiers." The observer's equipment included a BC telescope with 20x magnification, M1 plotting board, SCR 610 radio, a 48.5 lb backpack unit, map case with aerial photographs, compass, and rangefinder. The psychological burden was significant. Forward observers could see the human cost of their actions through their lenses. German soldiers fleeing bunkers, the wounded, the dead. Many reported nightmares decades after the war. Captured German documents and post-war interviews revealed the terror inspired by 240mm bombardment. The Wehrmacht's experience fighting the Soviets, who relied on mass artillery barrages, had not prepared them for American precision firepower. A November 1944 report from the German 7th Army, captured at Metz, stated, "Enemy super-heavy artillery represents a new form of warfare. Individual bunkers are engaged with extreme precision observed fire. Casualties caused by single shells exceed those of conventional barrages. The effect on morale is catastrophic. Troops refuse to occupy forward bunkers." The German 19th Army defending the Vosges reported that 60% of casualties came from artillery, with 240mm fire causing disproportionate losses despite its limited volume. Bunkers that had protected troops for months became death traps as soon as American observers identified them. Post-war interviews with German veterans consistently emphasized the psychological impact. Former Oberst Heinrich Zimmern, who commanded a regiment on the Siegfried Line, stated in 1962, "Common artillery we could endure, but those monstrous shells broke our spirit. When you saw a bunker disappear, you understood that nowhere was safe. Many of my men shot themselves rather than wait for the next shell." The M1 240mm howitzer was part of an Allied super-heavy artillery force that included British and Soviet weapons, but American industrial capacity made the difference. Comparative production numbers: U.S. M1 240mm howitzer, 315 units. British BL 7.2-inch howitzer, 36 units. Soviet 200mm BR-5 mortar, 47 units. German 24mm K3 railway gun, 8 units. The American advantage lay not only in quantity, but in mobility and sustained operations. While German and Soviet super-heavy guns required rail transport or extensive site preparation, the M1 could be towed slowly by tracked vehicles and positioned anywhere with suitable ground. British. Observers consistently praised American super-heavy artillery. Major General Sidney Kirkman, artillery commander of the 13th Corps, wrote, "The American 240mm howitzer achieved what our own heavy guns could not: the rapid and systematic destruction of fortified positions. At Cassino, these weapons were largely responsible for the breakthrough." As Allied forces advanced into German territory in early 1945, the 240mm howitzer continued its destructive work. Every German city designated as a fortress by Hitler faced systematic bombardment from super-heavy artillery. The siege of Aschaffenburg from March 25 to April 3, 1945, demonstrated the weapon's urban warfare capabilities. The German 36th Infantry Division had fortified the medieval city, barricading streets and converting buildings into strongpoints. The 265th Field Artillery Battalion positioned 4 howitzers across the main river, systematically destroying defensive positions. The precision was remarkable. Forward observers could place 240mm shells through specific buildings without damaging adjacent structures. This selective destruction convinced many German commanders to surrender rather than see their cities leveled. The capture of Nuremberg from April 16 to 20, 1945, saw 3 240mm battalions in action. Medieval fortifications reinforced with modern concrete crumbled under the bombardment. The 698th Field Artillery Battalion destroyed 8 main bunkers in the old city walls in 4 hours of firing on April 19. When Germany surrendered on May 8, 1945, American 240mm howitzers had made a decisive contribution to victory. Final U.S. Army Ordnance statistics: total shells fired in the European theater of operations, 118,429. Bunkers and fortifications engaged, 3,847. Confirmed destroyed, 3,114, 81%. Damaged beyond use, 489, 13%. Shells per target destroyed, average of 38. Maximum range achieved in combat, 25,002 to 56 yards. Gun tube replacements required, 23. Catastrophic failures, 0. The human cost inflicted by 240mm fire is harder to quantify. German records, often incomplete, suggest 15,000 to 20,000 direct casualties from 240mm under bombardment, with psychological casualties possibly doubling that number. Combat experience led to continuous improvements in the howitzer's employment. Initial operations revealed that the 8-hour setup time limited tactical flexibility. By 1945, experienced crews had reduced assembly time to less than 4 hours through improved procedures and equipment. The development of mechanical fuse setters increased the rate of fire from 1 shot every 3 minutes to 1 every 2 minutes for sustained operations. Improved powder formulations extended the barrel's life from 500 to 800 rounds between replacements. The most significant innovation was the integration of photo reconnaissance with fire planning. By 1945, forward observers received annotated aerial photographs showing each potential target numbered and on a grid. This reduced mission processing time from 10 minutes to less than 4. Although this narrative focuses on European operations, 240mm howitzers saw limited service in the Pacific. 6 weapons supported the Philippines campaign. destroying Japanese fortifications at Corregidor in February 1945. Concrete-piercing shells proved especially effective against Japanese cave fortifications, sealing entrances and creating concussion casualties deep within the mountains. Plans existed for extensive employment of the 240 mm in Operation Downfall, the invasion of Japan. The U.S. Army projected the need for 100 howitzers to reduce Japanese home island fortifications. Japan's surrender made this unnecessary, but captured Japanese officers later admitted that their defensive plans had not accounted for American super-heavy artillery capabilities. Military historians consider the M1 240 mm howitzer a revolutionary weapon that fundamentally changed siege warfare. Its combination of mobility, precision, and destructive power made traditional fortifications obsolete. The official U.S. Army history concluded that the 240 mm howitzer provided ground forces with a capability previously reserved for naval fire or strategic bombing. It could destroy any fortification with surgical precision, profoundly affecting the physical and psychological dimensions of war. Soviet observers who had access to captured German fortifications were particularly impressed. Marshal Vasily Chuikov, who had commanded at Stalingrad, examined destroyed bunkers of the Siegfried Line and commented, "The Americans found the solution to modern fortifications, not mass, but precision. One weapon achieving what 100 of ours could not." The terror inspired by 240 mm bombardment left lasting psychological scars. The German Veterans Association documented high rates of specific phobias among survivors. Seismophobia, fear of vibrations, 73% of bunker survivors. Claustrophobia, 67%. Phonophobia, fear of loud sounds, 89%. Dr. Hans Mueller, treating veterans in Munich during the 1950s, identified bunker syndrome, a complex of symptoms including nightmares, panic attacks, and inability to enter concrete structures. His research suggested that the sudden and complete destruction of supposedly safe positions created unique trauma patterns. American veterans also carried psychological burdens. Forward observers reported recurring dreams about requesting fire missions. Gun crews described permanent hearing damage despite protective gear. The physical sensation of the firing, the ground shock, the chest compression, and the overwhelming sound remained vivid decades later. The successful employment of 240 mm howitzers represented the American industrial philosophy, mass production of precision weapons. While Germany produced individual masterpieces like the 600 mm Karl Gerät mortar, 6 built, or the 800 mm Schwerer Gustav railway gun, 2 built, America produced effective weapons in mass. The comparison is instructive. Our German 600 mm Karl Gerät required 24 hours of assembly and fired 1 shot every 10 minutes. The American M1 240 mm had 315 produced, required 4 hours of assembly, and fired 1 shot every 2 minutes. This represented different approaches to warfare. Germany sought miracle weapons, Wunderwaffen, that would provide a decisive advantage through technological superiority. America sought producible weapons that would provide an advantage through quantity and reliability. The 240 mm howitzer program cost approximately $120 million in 1945, including development, production, and ammunition. This was equivalent to the cost of 40 B-24 bombers or 1,600 Sherman tanks. However, the strategic impact, the ability to reduce any fortification quickly, justified the investment. The influence of the M1 240 mm howitzer extended beyond World War II. Its success demonstrated the value of mobile super-heavy artillery, influencing Cold War weapon development. The Soviet Union developed the 2S-4 Tyulpan, 240 mm self-propelled mortar, citing the American experience in World War II. 2. Fire control techniques developed for the 240 mm, particularly the FDC system and aerial reconnaissance integration, became standard for all artillery. Modern GPS-guided munitions trace their conceptual ancestry to the precision fire missions of 1944-45. Several M1 howitzers survive as monuments. Fort Sill, Oklahoma, displays serial number 14, which fired the first combat shot at Anzio. The Watervliet Arsenal Museum preserves number 1, the prototype that proved mobile super-heavy artillery was possible. The M1 240 mm howitzer achieved something rare in military history. It made an entire category of military architecture obsolete. For centuries, fortifications provided defensive advantage. Steel and concrete bunkers represented the ultimate expression of this philosophy. The 240 mm howitzer ended this era in 18 months of combat. General Dwight D. Eisenhower, in his post-war memoirs, wrote, "The 240 meters howitzer gave us the ability to break any defensive position quickly and economically. It saved thousands of Allied lives by eliminating fortifications that would have required costly infantry attacks." Field Marshal Albert Kesselring, defending Italy and later southern Germany, offered the enemy's perspective. The American 240 mm gun was a weapon for which we had no answer. Our bunkers, built at enormous cost in materials and labor, became death traps. The psychological effect was devastating. The troops lost faith in any defensive position. Behind the statistics were individual soldiers whose service brought victory. Their stories, preserved in unit histories and personal memoirs, humanized the mechanical destruction. Sergeant David E. Mathesy of the 697th Field Artillery Battalion served from Anzio until the end of the war, participating in the destruction of over 100 enemy positions. In a 1990 interview, he reflected, "We knew we had something special. When the infantry called us, we could eliminate obstacles that had stopped entire divisions, but we also knew each shell could kill dozens of enemy soldiers. It was necessary, but it wasn't easy." Lieutenant Harold Saunders of the 222nd Field Artillery Battalion directed fire during the Normandy breakout. His forward observer team spent 73 consecutive days in combat, calling for missions that destroyed 31 German strongpoints. The 240 meters was our trump card. When nothing else worked, when the Germans thought they were safe, we could reach out and touch them. It saved American lives, and that was what mattered. These men, and thousands like them, operated weapons of unprecedented destructive power with professional precision. They transformed American industrial power into battlefield victory, one devastating shell at a time. German tactical doctrine evolved rapidly in response to 240 mm bombardment, though no truly effective countermeasure emerged. By late 1944, Wehrmacht defensive instructions emphasized dispersion and camouflage rather than fortification. The German 7th Army Tactical Directive of December 1944 stated, "Fixed fortifications must be abandoned when American super-heavy artillery is present. Troops must construct frequently relocated field positions with overhead cover sufficient only for conventional artillery. Bunkers concentrate casualties rather than preventing them." This represented a complete reversal of German defensive doctrine developed over decades. The Prussian tradition of elaborate field fortifications, refined in World War I and on the Eastern Front, crumbled before American firepower. Some German innovations showed promise. Decoy positions heated to simulate occupancy sometimes diverted fire from real positions. Smoke generators obscured observation. Electronic jamming attempted to disrupt American radio communications. But these measures only delayed the inevitable. General Hasso von Manteuffel, commanding the 5th Panzer Army during the Battle of the Bulge, summarized German frustration. "We could accept being outproduced. That was expected when fighting America. But the precision of your heavy artillery made every defensive position vulnerable. We were not just outgunned, but outclassed." Operating the 240 mm howitzers also took a toll on American forces. Crews suffered extensive hearing damage. Post-war Veterans Administration studies found that 90% of 240 mm veterans had significant hearing loss. The concussion from the firing caused chronic traumatic encephalopathy in some long-serving crew members. Forward observers suffered the highest casualty rates of any artillery specialty. Of 127 forward observers trained for 240 mm battalions, 31 were killed and 43 wounded, a casualty rate of 58%. Their exposed positions and the value Germans placed on eliminating them made survival unlikely. Mechanical failures, though rare, could be catastrophic. On March 3, 1945, a premature inboard detonation of a 240 mm howitzer near Prüm killed 5 crew members. The investigation revealed a faulty fuse, leading to improved quality control procedures. The logistical burden was immense. Each 240 mm battalion required 67 vehicles, including specialized prime movers, cranes, and ammunition carriers. Fuel consumption averaged 2,000 gallons daily when on the move. The weight of the guns damaged roads, requiring engineering support to maintain supply routes. The M1 240 mm howitzer represented the American philosophy of war in its most effective form. Overwhelming firepower delivered with precision, backed by unlimited industrial production. While individual German bunkers might be stronger, American industry could destroy them faster than Germany could build them. This mathematical certainty of victory through production terrified German commanders more than tactical defeat. They could counter superior generalship with clever tactics, compensate for numerical disadvantage with superior training, but they could not answer unlimited precision firepower backed by an endless supply of ammunition. The 240 mm howitzer was, ultimately, a manifestation of American industrial democracy defeating European totalitarianism. Free workers in Detroit, Pittsburgh, and Watervliet produced weapons that destroyed fortifications built by slave labor. The triumph was not just military, but a moral proof that democratic societies could marshal greater power than dictatorships. The German encounter with American 240 mm howitzers was more than a military defeat. It was a psychological transformation through technological shock. Soldiers who believed in the supremacy of German engineering, the invulnerability of concrete fortifications, and the advantage of prepared defense found that American industrial capacity had made their entire military doctrine obsolete. The numbers tell only part of the story. 315 howitzers produced, 118,429 shells fired, 3,114 bunkers destroyed. The true impact was measured in the complete collapse of German faith in fixed defenses. Each shattered bunker demonstrated American superiority, not just in firepower, but in every aspect of modern war: logistics, production, technology, and organization. The 240 mm howitzer did more than destroy fortifications. It demolished the psychological foundations of German resistance. Wehrmacht soldiers learned to fear not just the shell, but everything it represented: unlimited ammunition, precision fire control, mechanical reliability, and the terrifying efficiency of American industrial democracy. In the ruins of the Siegfried Line lay not just broken concrete, but the shattered remnants of Nazi Germany's military pretensions. The thunder of the 240 mm howitzer was the sound of American industrial power proclaiming inevitable victory. Every German soldier who heard it understood its terrible meaning. They had challenged the arsenal of democracy and lost. The terror would echo long after the guns fell silent. Veterans would spend decades trying to process the trauma of seeing their supposedly impregnable fortifications disappear in clouds of pulverized concrete. But from that terror came transformation. The recognition that the era of fixed fortifications had ended, and with it, any military doctrine based on static defense. The M1 240mm howitzer had spoken with the voice of American industry, and its message was unmistakable. In modern industrial war, there is no defensive position that cannot be destroyed, no fortification that cannot be breached, no bunker that cannot become a tomb. The Germans were not simply terrified when US 240mm howitzers obliterated their fortresses. They were transformed by the revelation of American power that made resistance genuinely futile. In the end, the greatest victory of the 240mm howitzer was not the fortifications it destroyed, but the minds it changed. German soldiers who had started the war believing in their technological superiority ended it understanding that they had been crushed by an industrial democracy that could turn raw materials into precision weapons faster than totalitarianism could build concrete walls. The thunder of the 240mm howitzer was democracy's answer to tyranny.